CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. $100 billion promised to poorer countries to help fight climate change. But is it too little, too late as our planet heats up?
Our other headlines, China's Premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty.
Leaders of the United States and India hail a new chapter in their relationship after signing defence and trade agreements.
And calls for an investigation from the families who've lost their loved ones in the Titanic submarine tragedy.
China's Premier Li Qiang has urged China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty.
He was speaking at the summit in France, looking at ways to ease the debt burden on some of the world's most vulnerable countries and help them cope with the impact of higher temperatures. France's President Macron says wealthy countries have finally agreed on long-promised climate funding worth $100 billion. But he added that the private sector must play a bigger role.
We have finalised the long-awaited $100 billion climate finance pledge. We have stepped up efforts to seal this funding that was originally promised in 2021. But we must mobilise even more private financing. There is so much private finance available, but simply put, it is not heading in the right direction towards middle-income and poorer countries.
Well, the world is warming and evidence is now tangible with earlier and more frequent heat waves right across the globe.
There have been scores of deaths and hospitalisations in India, and temperatures have also soared in China, with Beijing upgrading its warning for hot weather to its highest level. Our correspondent Li Jingyi reports.
The world has experienced its hottest ever first 11 days of June. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service said that average air temperatures went over 1.5 degrees Celsius for the first time compared to the pre-industrial early 20th century. In northern China, an orange alert for high temperatures was renewed. The capital, Beijing, is among the hardest hit. The highest level red alert was raised on Friday, the city's first red alert in 9 years. The temperature in Beijing soared to 41.1 degrees Celsius on Thursday afternoon, the second highest reading since reliable records began in Beijing, just shy of the record 41.9 in 1999.
I never thought Beijing was going to be hotter than Nanjing. The highest temperature in Beijing went up to 40 degrees Celsius.
Shandong province is also on a red alert with temperatures surging over 40 degrees in 26 regions. A number of service stations have been set up for outdoor workers to take a rest.
They give us some respite in this scorching summer so that we can do our jobs and serve the city.
In India, the heat has led to cases of heat stroke, hospitalizations and deaths. The cities north and east have seen temperatures of up to 46 degrees this week. Officials in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh are probing the deaths of nearly 60 people that reports attributed to searing temperatures.
I have been doing this job even when the temperatures rose above 45 degrees Celsius. This is the first time life has been so excruciating. We might face more problems from the scorching heat.
Other parts of Asia have seen record temperatures since early May, such as over 44 degrees in Vietnam, over 43 degrees in Laos and 41 degrees in Bangkok. The heat wave is also searing North America and Europe. Tens of millions in the southern United States are under extreme heat advisories. Some cities in Texas have seen temperatures spiking over 45 degrees Celsius. In Europe, Spain registered its hottest spring on record this year and the second driest ever. In France, 2/3 of the water tables are below normal levels in June. Li Jingyi, CGTN.
So an agreement has been made promising funding to fight climate change at that summit in Paris. Our correspondent Ken Brown is there. So Ken, what have they agreed and how significant is it?
Well, there's been some big talk in the lead-up to this summit. French President Macron called for a public finance shock. United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres talked about a reconfiguration of the global financial architecture. The aim is to address poverty and inequality, particularly in the context of the climate crisis. Now, today, we finally saw some solid numbers. $200 billion promised to the World Development Banks over the next 10 years, $1 billion by wealthier nations, which you mentioned earlier. That was a real sticking point at the recent COP27 in Egypt. Voices in the Global South said that wealthier nations simply weren't living up to their promises and were not putting the money on the table. Now, while that is a positive step, in reality, it's far off from what impoverished nations need. $100 billion doesn't come near to the $300 billion of damage done last year. The estimates by extreme weather events related to the climate crisis. Guterres has proposed a $500 billion annual fund to help with these issues worldwide. Yesterday, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said we need a robust and predictable safety net, calling for more below-market financing, debt relief and grants. So positive steps, but a reordering of the world's financial system may have to wait a little while longer.
Ken, thank you very much. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Paris.
Well, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Yves Le Drian, told me about his expectations for this climate pledge.
It's right that there has been a range of international summits with lots of pledges, but then after 6 months, a year, 2 years, we see that the pledges are not followed up by real commitments and by transfer of money. And so I think Macron, as the inviting host, is very conscious of that. He said that also in interviews, so I think they will take care of that. I hope so, because it's crucial.
We've seen a rather mixed bag, if I can put it like that, when it comes to geopolitical relationships this week. I mean, how important is it that the world's two largest economies work together on this, that they're on the same page?
I think it's important that China and the US work closely together. It's not sufficient, though. I'm not such a strong believer in the balance of powers between US and China. I think if we really want to revive, redynamize the multilateral framework and multilateralism as such, we have to come to a real, more pluralistic approach. I think G20 is a better setting for that. So I think it's a good, interesting first step if China and US again manage to have a connection, have a dialogue, a respectful, fair dialogue, open dialogue. So that's good, but it's not sufficient. I think we should break out of this bipolar structure of geopolitics.
You're a seasoned political observer, a former Prime Minister with substantial experience in the international political field. I mean, how do you evaluate Europe's current relationship with China in what's frankly been a rather difficult time? And what is your outlook for this relationship over the coming years?
I think in a couple of decades we will look back at the period so to say, 1995 to 2015, more or less, as the golden decades, the two golden decades of EU-China relations. I think it's important now that we resume that path of win-win cooperation. The concept of shared societies is a good concept to promote, and I think that at the side of the European Union, we really should integrate in whatever decision-making on key domains, key issues, that the EU only has a chance to tackle its challenges and to tackle global challenges, to be productive in that field, under the condition that it, very well cooperates with China. It is one thing, for instance, to announce very ambitious targets, objectives in terms of CO2 emission reduction, but you have to draw as a consequence that you have very constructively to cooperate with China. And for instance, that institutional frameworks, treaties like the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, but also in other domains that you have to have a more constructive attitude. I think an important step was already taken to not to talk anymore about decoupling. It's more now about de-risking. But please don't abuse the fair security concerns and the defense of some interests of European citizens. Don't mix it up with pure protectionism.
China's premier is heading home after his visit to Europe. Juliet Mann has been talking to the renowned American economist Jeffrey Sachs about the strained ties between China, the United States and Europe.
The question is whether we're going to have decent, normal relations with Europe, China, and the United States, or whether there's going to be conflict. The United States is afraid of China's rise. It has become quite hostile to China's rise. I think that this is absurd. China's economic development is in America's interest as well as China's interest, obviously, and world interest. So I think it's a win-win proposition. When you're an economist, you believe in win-win. That prosperity is good for everybody. When you are a geopolitical strategist, you believe win-lose. If China advances, that's bad for the U.S. So I think all this talk about de-risking and decoupling is kind of the word language of the geostrategists who I don't much agree with on anything.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Juliet Mann this weekend here on CGTN.
The Turkish currency has hit another new low a day after the country's central bank nearly doubled interest rates. The lira is now around 26 to the dollar, having lost more than a quarter of its value since the start of this year. Officials moved away from President Erdogan's rather unorthodox monetary policy and raised the base rate to 15%. But that increase was much less than what most economists had been calling for.
Ford is said to be preparing for a fresh round of redundancies in the United States. The new layoffs are expected to affect staff in the gasoline-powered car division, as well as its electric vehicle sector. Last year, the car maker announced plans to reduce structural costs of up to $3 billion.
Facebook owner Meta says it'll stop allowing news access on its platforms in Canada due to new legislation. The Canadian Parliament has passed a law that will force internet giants to pay news publishers for content posted on their sites. Meta said the bill was fundamentally flawed legislation.
Cathay Pacific says it expects to post its first half-year profit in 3 years after a strong rebound from the pandemic. Hong Kong's flagship airline was hit hard by years of border closures and strict quarantine measures. It's now benefiting from soaring ticket prices across the industry.
A global race is on to dominate electric car manufacturing, and Europe is stepping on the accelerator. France wants to position itself at the centre of this race and is unveiling its first dedicated EV battery production facility in May.
3 more gigafactories are being proposed in an area of France that's been dubbed Battery Valley. Our correspondent Nathalie Marras reports.
This giant assembly line of EV batteries marks a significant step in France's push to dominate Europe's green industrial revolution. It's also part of the country's efforts to close the gap on China's dominance of electric car making.
Yes, it's a race, it's a global race. That's why you see European Union and the US putting in a lot of money, several billions of euros and dollars are being invested to grow the investment and the capabilities in the US and in Europe. It's not a closed market, so the Chinese will also be probably part of the equation. First, because they will continue to provide some batteries to the market, but also because on the value chain they are very present. And as you can see, there is already Chinese players who are investing in developing gigafactories in Europe.
Around 50 such factories and projects related to electric vehicle manufacturing have been announced in France in recent years. This as leading companies look to bring the supply of components for electric motoring closer to their primary markets. Over the next 18 months, northern France's Battery Valley hopes to establish itself as the powerhouse of a transformation in Europe's automotive industry as it becomes the overseas base of Prologium from Taiwan, Sino-Japanese company Envision, as well as a French startup Vecor, with hope of luring other big players from the east.
Chinese automaker BYD has an ambitious production timeline in Europe. This year, the company aims to establish between 15 and 20 sales and after-sales outlets in France alone. By 2025, it hopes to drive that figure up to 100 dealerships. As it expands, BYD is also rumored to be scouting locations for its first car factory in Europe.
77% of electric car batteries are made in China. The country's electric cars also dominate the global market.
France is a very big business, and there's a big market share there for electric cars, though it was quiet at first. It was hard to convince people to drive electric cars. But since June, the market has picked up thanks to lots of communication on our side, explaining our brand and why BYD is here.
The French government has also been courting BYD company executives to set up operations in the former coal mining Pas-de-Calais region. But the company hasn't revealed its choice. Europe is stepping up its production of batteries and electric vehicles ahead of an EU ban on the sale of new petrol cars after 2035. Natalie Malchas, CGTN, Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Breaking up is hard to do. 7 years since the Brexit referendum, we assess the economic and political legacy of leaving the EU.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Friday marks 7 years since Britain voted to leave the European Union. The results saw the Leave camp win by 52 to 48%. 4
years after that, the UK officially split from Brussels. 4 prime ministers and a pandemic later, Brexit still dominates the political agenda. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Yolo Abdavid. So, 7 years on, and the impact of Brexit still very much being felt.
Still being discussed on British television last night, an entire programme to discuss with people who voted leave. Did it work? Did it work out? How many people have changed their minds? The assessments still continue, all kinds of assessments, social assessments, education assessments, political, economic and so on. And really, if you talk to the 2 main political parties, they don't want to talk about Brexit. It's not going to win votes, it's going to lose votes. The smaller parties definitely want to talk about it because they want to rejoin the European Union. That's how divisive, that's how emotive it's been and is continuing to be. So what is it about? Is it about the economics? Is it about immigration? Is it about sovereignty? National sovereignty means different things in different parts of the UK. Depends where you live. So the timeline is really interesting. The vote in 2016, 7 years since that. Then there was that withdrawal agreement that was agreed to start the 2-year transition in 2017. Then nothing happened for 3 years. And then we had 2019, which was a momentous year because it was totally a political argument within the Parliament and within the country in Britain. Fall of Theresa May as a Prime Minister, and then we had another Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson then went on to lose his role and job because of COVID. So you can see there's a cycle there. And it's been discussion after discussion after discussion. It's not over because a lot of the agreement and the trade tariffs are not actually coming in until next year.
OK, well, we're 7 years down on the experience of what Brexit looks like. Do we have any idea of what people think, what people feel? That terrible question.
There must have been hundreds of opinion polls over the last 7 years, and of course before the vote. I've just selected a few today, which is quite interesting. So this is from Statista Research Department. In hindsight, did Britain get it wrong in terms of the vote? And now 56% of the people they've asked for a response think it was wrong to leave the EU, compared to 32% who thought it was the right decision. That shows a kind of a Brexit, a Brexit regret. So that is definitely an increase on what has become quite common since April, March 2021, when there was probably the highest popularity of Brexit because of the COVID vaccine being rolled out quicker in Britain than in other European countries. Then there's another poll from Public First. They say that 18% of Leave voters think that Brexit has been a success. So that's a fifth, really. Only a fifth think that Brexit has been a success for the United Kingdom outside the European Union. They break that down, very complicated, and the problem with statistics, you can play them each way. You can quote them in different ways. But there is a pattern, and that pattern is continued by YouGov with quite a large survey, a Brexit tracker survey, which has been quite continuous, and they say that 58.2% of people in Britain would now vote to remain, to rejoin the European Union. Now that's interesting. If we are looking at an election next year in Britain and potentially a change of government, the smaller parties, all of them, are campaigning on that. They want to rejoin. It'll be interesting because when you talk to people outside journalism, outside politics, they're really fed up. They don't want to talk about Brexit. They're fed up to the back teeth of it. But it may become an electoral issue again.
Yolo, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdallah.
Well, that's the political background. Let's talk about the money and talk to Vicky Price, the distinguished international economist and business consultant. Vicky, good to see you. Well, let's talk about the scores on the door. 7 years on from the Brexit vote. I mean, how is the UK economy doing? How's it looking?
It's really interesting, of course, because we've had COVID, and of course we've also had the issues from the war in Ukraine, which have complicated things a little bit. But nevertheless, there have been quite a lot of calculations on how other countries that were very similar to us, and certainly were growing at a certain pace before the Brexit vote, how they have done, despite COVID, despite the energy crisis that we've had. And the findings are, I'm afraid, that they've all done considerably better than we have done, particularly on the trading front. And that was mentioned a little bit earlier from your correspondent. And the interesting thing is that as a nation, the UK now trades less as a percentage of its GDP. And the analysis that has been done by the likes of the Centre for European Reform, for example, is that we have probably lost some 5% of our GDP since the Brexit vote. And that's a real issue, because if you're looking at the problems we're having now, how do you recover from COVID? How do you recover from the energy crisis? What you need is considerable growth. And that growth, I think, is eluding us right now.
How challenging has it been for the United Kingdom to re-establish trade relations and systems with Europe following Brexit? And how better off, if we can quantify that particular European dynamic, is the UK now?
Well, it's been quite difficult. The agreement that was reached still left loads of things to be resolved later, including how you deal with services, particularly the financial services, how you deal with ensuring that despite the abolition, if you like, of the freedom for movement, people can still move around and do proper business, and how to bring in workers that you really need in a number of sectors. And one of the things that we're seeing now in the UK is that there's a big shortage in areas where EU workers were dominant, if you like, or such as the hospitality sector, retail, tourism, entertainment, for example. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such high cost pressure in the UK and also high inflation. Trying to re-establish some better trading agreements. There have been attempts, and I think we're moving towards doing so. Remember the Northern Ireland Protocol, which more or less left the Northern Ireland as part of the EU, but with restrictions in terms of the way in which they could do business with the rest of the United Kingdom. That has now been amended. It's more friendly. It's the Windsor Agreement, as it's called now, which is allowing perhaps for greater freedom of movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That also has led to a bit of a rapprochement with Europe. There is a lot to work on. I'm afraid it's been very, very slow for many sectors. And because we're all going to be completely stuck in pre-election period over the next year, we may not see as much progress as perhaps we should do.
Vicky, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Vicky Price, the economist and business consultant.
Thank you.
Well, from the UK economy to the global economy, and this week's hawkish comments from central banks have stoked fears that they're prepared to risk a recession to get core prices down. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrace in New York. So, John, central banks dampening the rally.
They really are, aren't they? But when you think about it, we had a hell of a run-up, actually, since January, and the NASDAQ is up 28% since the turn of the year. That's amazing. Although I have to say, I think a lot of that is based on artificial intelligence and the excitement around that. You know, last year it was the metaverse. This year it's AI. I think there might be a bit of a bubble going on there between you and me, but we'll not comment on that now. The more important thing is those central banks, and of course they're all doing it. And the Bank of England yesterday unleashed a bazooka. That's how it's described here. Interest rates at 5%, bit of a surprise all round. But it's not just the Bank of England, it's the others as well. ECB has done it in the last week or so. The Bank of Oz did it, and in the last 24 hours, Norway, Switzerland and Turkey. I heard you commenting on that, Jamie, just now. Turkey raising interest rates by pretty much double. President Erdogan going, I don't think this is a good idea. Everybody else saying, we love it, although it's not as much as they thought it was going to be. And on top of all this, the Bank of Japan reporting now that inflation's coming in much higher than expected in Japan as well. There's even talk of an interest rate hike there, which is news because the inflation rate in Japan has been at minus 0.1% for the best part of the last 20 years. The dollar is up against the yen now, and the dollar index is rising as well. And of course, here in America, as we've reported on this program in the last couple of days, Chairman Powell, the head of the central bank, he's been appearing before the House and the Senate and basically touting the fact there are going to be 2 more interest rate hikes between now and the end of the year to calm 40-year high inflation, particularly core inflation, which he's particularly worried about. Except that yesterday the markets recovered strongly, even though he was commenting in the Senate. And this is because he can't say how much it'll be, when it'll be. It might be July, it won't be August because they're on holiday. It might be September. It's all a bit vague, really. And the chairman also keeps saying, when he says there could well be 2 more interest rate hikes, he also says that a lot depends, it all depends, in fact, on the data. And so if the data comes in and points to no need to rise interest rates, then they won't. So it's all a bit confusing, as it has been for the longest time. We had a couple of things in today. We had a flash snapshot of PPI, which is producer inflation, and it did contract, but the services department of that didn't. And the Bank of America is saying it's had record withdrawals in the last couple of weeks. On the markets, because of the central banks and the remarks by Jerome Powell, the Dow is down 147 points, and we are on course for the worst week since Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And that was back on the 9th of March. Guys.
So, John, fine day here in London and where you are, a day when many people choose to work from home, but the bank Citigroup is getting tough with home workers.
So we are told. Now, this is Bloomberg reporting this story today, and it's getting a lot of traction here on Wall Street, as you can imagine. Now, Jane Fraser, who heads up Citigroup, huge international bank, massive thing. She's one of the very few women to head up a Fortune 500 company. She's from Scotland originally, and she is a work-from-home advocate. She said many times the importance of the work-life balance, even in banking. And she's actually said several times, you know, we're not going back to the days of the movies like The Wolf of Wall Street or Wall Street itself, starring Michael Douglas, you know, where you saw everybody from interns all the way to the top management basically working from 5 in the morning until midnight. No, we're not going back to those days, says Jane Fraser. However, it is being reported that Citigroup is a little concerned about some staff, and I think that some bankers all over Wall Street who really run this town, as you know, are generally concerned. And what they mean by that is they want really everybody from the intern through the managers to the senior managers to the people in the corner offices to be in one place for the maximum amount of time. And this applies to being here in New York and also traveling when you go overseas to audit companies or to buy or advise on other people buying companies. They want everybody kind of in the same place, at the same hotel or the same Airbnb. And this story speaks to the real tensions between staff and management over the issue of working from home. According to Bloomberg, Citigroup is going to let staffers who are low performers and who constantly come up with persistent absences that are unexplained, that they should come back to the office for a bit of training. Of course, the staff say, look, we're perfectly happy working from home. And one of the threats here is that this will go to the annual appraisal and affect the compensation. But people are saying, look, we don't care about compensation so much anymore because we don't have the costs of going in, so therefore we're not worried if we get a big pay rise at the end of the year. There's one other issue worth mentioning just very briefly. All of this does affect the cost of real estate. And it's said to be a time bomb, a ticking time bomb, because, of course, so many of these offices are empty and so many people own real estate, and, of course, the value is coming down. It could take 10 years to recover. And finally, Meta Platforms did a very similar thing to this a couple of weeks ago. Guys.
John, thanks very much. Our correspondent, John Terrace in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, calls for an investigation from the families who've lost their loved ones in the Titanic submarine tragedy.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. $100 billion is promised to poorer countries to help fight climate change during a summit in Paris. And China's premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty.
There are calls for an investigation from the families who lost their loved ones in the Titanic submarine tragedy. The tourist submarine is thought to have imploded on its way to explore the wreck of the Titanic, killing all 5 people on board. Questions are now being asked about the Titan sub's experimental design, its safety standards, and lack of certification. The United States Coast Guard said debris consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber had been found in the search area off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. Well, let's talk to the Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther in Boston in the United States. Philip, so the family's calling for an investigation into what we think happened.
Yeah, and they're going to get one. In the last hour, we have found out that it is going to be the U.S. Coast Guard that is going to be leading this investigation. The U.S. Coast Guard, of course, who here in Boston every day have been giving us updates into what was a search and rescue mission and now, of course, has turned into a recovery mission, yesterday declaring that those 5 men had died. So this investigation was not that easy, really, to coordinate. It's going to be the Coast Guard that's going to be leading it. The NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board in the United States, will also be contributing to it. We don't know at this point whether the Canadian Coast Guard will be involved as well, because of course this incident happened in international waters. The search and rescue mission was also a very international one, with Canadian, US, but also French and British participation. But that's investigation now officially underway. There are, of course, many questions being asked by family members, but also by experts, scientists, and maybe most importantly by those who knew this vessel, the Titan, from the inside, those who might have traveled on it, even to the depths of the Titanic wreckage. Some of the questions that have been asked, especially over the last few days during this anxious wait for news, have been whether this vessel truly was safe enough to travel to those depths, whether it had received all the certification that it didn't necessarily have to have, but could have received. And the other thing that, of course, is still to be answered is exactly when this implosion happened. We think we have more information on that from the U.S. Navy. It does look like those 3 days of this desperate international search were not necessarily, well, for nothing, but that there is that certainty that it was on Sunday, pretty early on, that this vessel, in fact, imploded.
Philip, does this tragedy change anything? I mean, as you say, there are still so many questions about what went wrong.
Yeah, well, the U.S. Coast Guard is telling us that it is too early to say whether any policy changes will happen, and that kind of thing tends to take months or even years. And that does indeed tend to be the case, but things do change after tragedies like this one. Of course, this world of deep water exploration is a relatively murky one, and it is also a relatively small community that participates in it. So any changes won't affect all that many people after all. As to what exactly happened, well, we do have a little bit more of a timeline from the U.S. Navy. Yesterday, shortly after those 5 men were declared dead, the U.S. Navy said that it had, in fact, detected an anomaly through its acoustic system, a secretive acoustic system, and that anomaly, well, that occurred at pretty much the exact time that the Titan, in fact, disappeared. That information was shared with the Coast Guard, and it is believed that that was the implosion that happened. But this investigation, or rather the search effort, still continued, because there was that glimmer of hope. Everybody did have that hope that those men would still be found alive, and it looks like those who were in charge of the search and rescue effort also still had that little bit of hope.
Philip, thank you for that. Philip Crowther from the Associated Press in Boston in the United States.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet top United States officials and business leaders on the final day of his visit to Washington. Modi has held talks with President Joe Biden and attended a state dinner at the White House. The two sides hailed a new era in their relationship and signed deals on microchips, minerals, tech and defence. Our correspondent Nathan King reports.
Yeah, all around the White House you've seen India and the US flags. He's addressed the US Congress for the second time, only the third leader to have a state visit, with this very, very lavish dinner going on behind me as well. And in the hard-nosed meetings, really, the US reaching out to India, both diplomatically, economically, and militarily. Let's take a listen to US President Biden.
Together, we're unlocking the shared future of what I believe to be unlimited potential. And with this visit, we're demonstrating once more how India and the United States are collaborating on nearly every human endeavor and delivering progress across the board.
Now, as you know, India, like many Asian countries, are going under a transformational shift. It's now the most populous country in the world, according to statistics, and its economy is growing amongst the fastest in the world. Now, obviously, the US wants to decouple, de-risk, whatever language it uses, from China. They see India as a big opportunity, and India sees an opportunity in this, from semiconductors to space. Let's listen to the Indian Prime Minister.
By increasing our cooperation in fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space, quantum, and telecom, we are creating a strong and futuristic partnership.
Yeah, the White House and New Delhi essentially launching this technological partnership. They call it for the 21st century. 3 big US semiconductor firms either announcing big investment in India or ability to train 60,000 Indian engineers when it comes to semiconductors. We have General Electric setting up a facility to produce jet engines using technology that they don't even share with Japan. Remember, back in the day, the US refused to share technology with India over defense because of its closeness with Russia, which still continues, and Ukraine didn't really come up that much, even though India has abstained from votes in the United Nations against the US, continues to import a huge amount of Russian oil and buy Russian defense equipment. But, you know, the elephant in the room was not Indian, it was China. And essentially, the US see India as a potential counterweight to China. They share a border. There's going to be drone technology sold to India, which could help with that. And also playing up organizations like the Quad, which India, the US, Australia, and Japan are in. But you can expect also some problems with the relationship. I mentioned Ukraine, but human rights being one of them, even though India is touted as the world's biggest democracy. The US is, especially behind the scenes, there's a lot of backsliding, treatment of Muslim minority in India, but it's hundreds of millions, and you don't hear the word Kashmir mentioned at all. So this is very much an alliance of convenience. The US wanted to put human rights at the heart of its foreign policy, the Biden administration coming in, but it looks like when it comes to India, it's really using its head. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
The UK is facing what's being described as a mortgage crisis. Interest rates on home loans have been rising for months and went up again on Thursday when the Bank of England raised its base rate by another 0.5%.
That's causing misery for homeowners and those hoping to get onto the property ladder. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
It's been a worrying week for British homeowners and those hoping to get a foot on the property ladder. Mortgage lenders have been putting up rates and pulling deals at the last minute. The average interest on a 2-year fixed-rate mortgage rose above 6% on Monday, the first time it's been that high since December, but below the peak after the so-called mini-budget crisis in September. Raphael Isnard works in business insurance. He feels relatively lucky to still have a couple of years left on his mortgage's current fixed rate, but he fears that his repayment costs will inevitably rise significantly soon.
It's very worrying, so we're actually taking a lot of measures right now to kind of save money already, because we just don't know how it's going to look like in a couple of years. So it's a bit scary.
Yeah, what are your concerns?
My concerns is that it's not going to go down. I don't see it really going down in the next couple of years. And with the news released a couple of days ago, it's even more worrying.
More than 400,000 people are due to see their existing fixed-term deals come to an end between July and September, a relatively high number. Meanwhile, the Resolution Foundation think tank reports that the average cost of remortgaging next year could rise by nearly $3,700 annually. Many people now face the prospect of having to cut costs elsewhere or sell their homes to downsize. Mortgage broker Kamil Walachevsky has been in the industry for 20 years. He saw similar anxiety in the 2008 financial crisis, but the difference this time is that mortgage holders have more debt, and today clients are seeing deals vanish.
even today, before actually meeting with you, I got the message from TSB, that was the latest lender, actually practically stopping lending today with no notice. They just withdrawing all the products. It was the same with HSBC last week, the same with Santander. Stressful for us, stressful for clients, and I don't think it is sustainable in the long term.
With annual inflation staying stubbornly high at 8.7% in April, the government says its priority is bringing that down. However, the Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, has just agreed measures with lenders to help those struggling to keep up with payments, including a grace period on repossessions and credit rating protections for those changing their mortgage terms. West London estate agents Whitman & Co say prices are staying quite strong, but managing expectations for what clients can afford is a big challenge.
They find a property they want to buy, go to make an offer on that property, and when they've had a decision in principle at a certain rate, find the property they really want to buy, they then go for a full application and find that product's gone. But it's going to be tough out there for quite a few people for quite a long time, I think.
The saying goes, an Englishman's home is his castle, but that dream is going to be a lot more expensive or even unobtainable for some time to come. Paul Barber, CGTN, London.
Ukraine says at least 3 people have been killed in Russian attacks in the south of the country. The local governor said 2 men died and several others were injured when the building they were in came under fire in the city of Kherson. Russian forces have continued shelling Kherson despite flooding caused by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Russia denies targeting civilians. The European Union has adopted its latest sanctions against Russia. It's the 11th time the EU has brought in restrictions to put pressure on Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. The latest measures are aimed at closing loopholes and tightening export restrictions so that goods do not reach Russia via other countries.
The head of the mercenary Wagner Group has accused Russia's military leaders of covering up the truth about the war in Ukraine. Yevgeny Prigozhin said the top brass were lying to President Putin and the Russian people about the scale of the losses on the battlefield. He made the accusations in a video posted on his Telegram channel. There's been no response from the Defence Ministry. Prigozhin is resisting an order for mercenary groups to sign contracts with the ministry before the 1st of July. A British intelligence report says Russia is increasing the number of dolphins it's training to protect its main military base in the Black Sea. The report said Moscow was boosting its defences at Sevastopol in Crimea and that the number of dolphin pens in the harbour had nearly doubled. It said Russia was likely to have trained the animals to prevent enemy divers from approaching.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, harvest time for bamboo leaves used to make traditional foods for farmers in China. It's one of the busiest times of the year.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country. There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Arts, politics and business have all come together at the Chinese embassy in Athens as guests celebrated the relationship between China and Europe.
Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas has the story.
Kung Fu warriors and Tai Chi masters performed to the sounds of traditional Chinese music at the country's embassy in Athens. An open house event by the embassy brought many people from the arts, politics, and business world together, discussing people-to-people exchanges, but also trade and investment.
We are two countries with history, with traditional relations, as much economic as political, and the trade between the two countries is really increasing. What we really want as Greece is to promote trade, to attract more investment from China.
Trade has already been increasing since the establishment of the Chinese Central and Eastern European Countries Corporation in 2012. Since the end of the pandemic and the reopening of both countries, Chinese imports have poured into Greece, rising by 15% over the last year, bringing the total to almost $1.3 billion. Greece's exports to China have remained fairly stable. It's hoped events like this could be a golden ticket to tapping into the Chinese market. It won't be easy, though, because the two countries have very different business practices. But there are international players who can help keep business moving more quickly and smoothly.
Right, then I think Hong Kong is a very good collaboration site. Then we can, as a bridge, to do all this. As you know, most of the Chinese people don't know the situation of Greek. But Hong Kong as an international trade hub, we have lots of this kind of experience. So we can help, even those financing, we can do help to both parties, both enterprises to do their business.
This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. Greece was one of the first European Union nations to sign the agreement, and some have questioned China's motives for investing in the country. But George Foras says those concerns are misplaced.
We shouldn't worry about investors who come here to invest, like we didn't worry about others that came before the Chinese, such as the Europeans, Americans. Many large corporations belong to foreigners.
But there was more to this reception than just trade talk. Guests also had a chance to enjoy each other's culture, sampling Chinese delicacies and traditional teas, as well as some of the products that two countries have been exporting to each other over the years. Evangelo Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The Dragon Boat Festival in China coincides with the harvest season for bamboo leaves, which are used to make traditional foods.
For leaf farmers, it's one of the busiest and most profitable times of the year.
Our correspondent Zheng Songwu reports.
It's usually moist and sweltering in Sichuan province by the time the Dragon Boat Festival falls, but that doesn't stop farmers from cutting and collecting the leaves used for wrapping glutinous rice dumplings. In most provinces in southern China, people wrap rice dumplings using the larger bamboo leaves from the wild. But in Sichuan's Meishan, there are 3 different leaves that the farmers grow on a large scale. The picking season lasts about a month, usually starting from April and ending after the Dragon Boat Festival. Well, the farmers usually cut off leaves using sickles like this one in my hand. And this ant beside me can collect 10,000 leaves every day, even the weather is poor. The ant Shen Xiu'e has been growing the leaves for 12 years. She farms nearly 1 hectare of them, bringing a sizable income for her family every year.
Leaf business has increased my income. I used to grow crops in this area, but they'd be wiped out by strong winds before the harvest. Then I started to grow wrapping leaves. I mainly grow leaves with big stripes. 100 leaves can be sold for 13 yuan, so they're more valuable compared to those with tiny stripes. I can earn 80,000 yuan during picking season.
Besides farmers like Shen Xiu'e, who only grows and sells leaves, some farmers also deliver them to transfer stations in the township. The leaves are then sold to other areas within Sichuan province, as well as neighboring provinces like Yunnan and Guizhou.
I collect leaves every day from several households. I can collect millions of leaves during the busiest period, but now the number is about 200,000. It's tiring, but I think it's worth helping farmers sell their products. The leaves earn me more than 10,000 yuan in a picking month.
Over 1,200 households in Suishan Township are growing the leaves, greatly stimulating the local economy.
So far, the farmers have sold hundreds of millions of leaves with an output value of nearly 8 million yuan. The wrapping leaves not only play a role in increasing people's income, but also offer beautiful scenery for people around their houses because they're always green.
The official of Suishan Township is now helping households to develop cooperatives, enhancing the industrial chain of the leaf business to promote rural revitalization. Zheng Song, CGTN, Sichuan Province.
Europe.cgtn.com has all of the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take of some of them.
The first nationwide village basketball tournament opened in front of thousands of spectators. The finals will take place in October. A Zongzi rapping competition has been held in Jiangxing to mark the Dragon Boat Festival. Foreign guests are given 10 minutes to wrap their dumplings. 2 giant pandas have been given special birthday cakes made of bamboo and carrots to celebrate turning 6. The International Cartoon and Animation Festival has been captivating visitors in Hangzhou. Highlights include a metaverse experience. A 3 times a week flight from Haikou to London Heathrow has begun. And yacht builders are working overtime to keep up with the surging demand for boat rentals, particularly in Hainan.
All that and more at CGTN.com.
The headlines again. $100 billion is promised to poorer countries to help fight climate change during a summit in Paris.
Our other headlines: China's premier urges China and Europe to rise above differences and find creative solutions to global problems like climate change and poverty.
And calls for an investigation from the families who lost their loved ones in the Titanic submarine tragedy.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN is Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.